response is to notify 911 and to seek
And
assistance.
that's actually one thing I was just reminded about, this facility is staffed 24/7, 365. So,
Yeah, somebody's in that control.
always, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
But it's nice to have a set of eyes on the ground.
There are, as part of our overall process, there are what we call rounds. There are operators that go out and do rounds every shift. And they have to go from, they have a specific set of rounds they have to do. It's more focused on monitoring equipment, but it's also looking for things like natural gas leaks, changing leaks.
I have a question on the air monitoring, if I could. I think that's, I don't know, I guess I'm looking at that approval letter you talked about, July 17th from DEP. And I guess this would be a question for Dan.
Yep.
I'm reading a sentence here, and I'd just like you to clarify it for me. I'm going to read it. According to the EPA's policy, a plan approval may be issued to Lacakawanna Energy Center since the impact of Lacakawanna Energy Center's proposed emissions was calculated by the model to be insignificant. What I'd like an explanation on is the next several words. Insignificant at the location and time of the modeled violations of the NAAQS.
All right, so National Ambient Air Quality Standards are standards that are devised to protect the general public health and welfare. And what EPA has, those standards have different averaging periods, and there are different pollutants associated with those National Ambient Air Quality Standards. They include sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, lead, particulate matter, and ozone. So those are the pollutants for which there are standards. EPA has established a procedure to determine whether or not your emissions from a source are small enough that they do not need to be further evaluated with respect to comparing to those national ambient air quality standards. And in some instances, the emissions from the facility were so low that when we performed the air dispersion modeling study, they were actually below the thresholds that US EPA has established for determining whether or not more involved analyses are required.
And those standards came off what?
Those,
Textbook readings of what's going to be in this plant, or another plant somewhere in operation?
those standards are national standards that they apply to any type of facility, whether you're talking about a cement plant, a power plant, an automobile manufacturing plant, a chocolate manufacturer, any type of source.
I guess the thing I was looking at, and I'm familiar with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, but it says at the location and time of the modeled violations.
Right. So the ambient air quality standards have averaging periods associated with it. And when you do a dispersion modeling study, you determine which particular location in space or locally to the facility may have a model violation. And that model violation will occur at a certain XY point, and it will occur during a certain time of the day, hour 10, hour 11, hour 12.
Okay.
In the situation with Lacakawanna Energy Center, we can demonstrate that our emissions do not contribute significantly to any model violations or any violations of the National Ambient Air Quality Standard by determining how the emissions from the facility are transported and dispersed. And we can demonstrate that for any time there might be a problem, we are not contributing to that problem.
All right.
Where were the receptors in that study?
The receptors are locations that are established in negotiation with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. They are a grid layout, and they are established at 100-meter spacings, so it's as if you took a square grid and dropped it down onto the facility and had a very dense spacing in the, say, the inner 2 kilometers, and then less dense spacing at greater downwind distances, to the extent where you're developing a 20 by 20 square grid. And you're predicting concentrations in that whole 20 by 20 square grid.
20 by 20 feet?
Kilometers.
Kilometers. And that grid is a 100-meter
It
grid?
starts out at 100 meters close into the facility, and I believe for this study, it was even at 50 meters in certain locations. So what happens is the model is a computer, it's a set of mathematical equations that EPA has developed over the course of 30 years, and it incorporates the best understanding of meteorology and dispersion and transport. And part of that process, you can put into that equation an X and a Y and a height location. And the model will use its information around the type of source you have, the height of the source, the temperature of the source, the emission rates, the meteorological conditions, the wind speed, the wind direction, the temperature, the atmospheric stability. It takes all that information and then it calculates out what a resulting concentration will be at any point that you desire to put into the model. And so we put in thousands of points.
Okay. And all those receptors came well below the National Ambient Air Quality Standards?
Correct.
Or tell me.
Correct.
I have a question that I read, and I think this is an article developed by your company about the EPA making some rulemaking on off-site air monitoring as opposed to being at the fence line, that it's more in the local population. Does that make any sense?
You're gonna need some more, probably a little bit more.
Let's see. This is called Ambient Monitoring Considerations, prepared by Dan and Colin,
Okay.
regarding some, I think relates to sulfur dioxide.
Sure.
And statements about the states were giving consideration, or EPA was giving consideration to transferring the responsibility for locating, building, maintaining and operating.
Okay. So you're referring to something called the data reporting rule, which is
Okay.
around SO2 emissions. And EPA established a NAAQS for SO2 back in 2000. And historically, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for SO2 had been a 3-hour, 24-hour, and an annual standard. So we looked at concentrations that occurred over a 3-hour period, concentrations that occurred over a 24-hour period, and annual concentrations. In 2000, EPA amended that NAAQS and made it into a 1-hour standard. The process by which EPA goes through and determines those areas that are meeting the NAAQS and those areas that are not meeting the NAAQS normally encompasses monitoring. So you put a shelter out in an area, you put a monitor out there, you draw a sample of the ambient air in, and you're making continuous second-by-second measurements of SO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. Those concentrations are then looked at over the course of 3 years, and EPA makes a determination as to whether or not the area is meeting the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for SO2. This process began in 2010 with the new NAAQS. EPA has languished in their determination as to what areas are in attainment and not in attainment, also because states haven't done their due diligence in getting all of the measurements made. Back in the 1970s, there were ambient monitors all throughout the country. There were over 2,000 ambient monitors. as the air quality has improved over the past 40 years, the need to measure concentration levels has decreased or has shifted to other pollutants. SO2 is a prime example of a pollutant that was monitored extensively back in the 70s, but now there are very few places that actually monitor for SO2 because all the places in the country were attaining the original NAAQS. With the standard being changed, that shifted everything. It put a lot of the states in the position of not having monitors available to perform their attainment designations. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the people, they didn't have the monitors to go out and determine whether or not counties were in attainment with the new NAAQS or out of attainment. So one of the things that EPA said is that we're going to work with the states to develop a program by which the states can either use dispersion modeling, or they can go out and work and do ambient monitoring to determine whether or not these areas are in attainment. This process has been something that the states have then turned to their regulated entities and said, you're gonna need to help us with this because this effort is too great for us to handle, and therefore we want to engage facilities to help do some of the monitoring or some of the modeling. So that's really the whole process, and that's really what's described in that particular article. I will mention, though, that the SO2 emissions from the Lacakawanna Energy Center, because it's a natural gas-fired facility, are so low that there's absolutely no concern with respect to the SO2 concentration levels in the area. That's a rather long-winded.
If I could go one step farther, because I've heard this question asked before, as you know, the facility will have continuous on-site monitoring.
Stack monitoring.
Stack monitoring. I have heard in other areas, people ask, what about a monitor somewhere in the community?
Correct.
And that's, I think, what you may be asking about. And the problem with that is, if I put a monitor at hose 2, and it measures something, how do I know where it's coming from? And that's why the monitoring requirements are at the facility. We have to meet them irrespective of what else may be occurring in the community, because if you put it somewhere else, it could be from a passing diesel truck, it could be from a fireplace, it could be from anything. There's no way to determine the source if you're out in the middle of wherever it may be.
So then that will lead us to, and thank you. My understanding is that DEP personnel would have access to the data generated by your monitoring instruments. So, and I also understand that DEP, you're required to report to them either quarterly or annually. So, can we, question for you guys, request that the borough assign a particular person or whatever, that upon proper notice to you guys would have access to their monitoring data?
The answer is
Says-
Upon request
yes, the answer is absolutely.
of our agents.
Right. Right, absolutely. And again, you can make that a condition, however you want to do it, but yes. Yes, I think in all fairness, it would probably need to go to the borough engineer or someone like that who would know what they're reading. You wouldn't know what it's reading, so this stuff isn't necessarily needed.
But the borough could have somebody trained,
Absolutely.
train an individual,
Sure.
whoever that might be.
Absolutely.
Or just access to the information on request to the
Oh, yeah,
ratings.
just
Of course. Absolutely.
And what if we find them to be inappropriate, we close the plant or what?
Well, no, but I think at least you could call DEP and have a conversation, you know, as opposed to them getting something in the mail 3 months later.
Dominic, the answer is likely yes, because remember that any conditions attached run with the life of the plant. And any violation of that is a violation of the conditions, and it could be subject them to a shutdown order by the board. So you have civil
In
remedies.
theory, yes. Right. The normal process would be, let's say it's within the 3 month period, 3 month reporting period of DEP. We submit information and someone is of the opinion that we've exceeded at a certain hour or a certain day. That is transmitted to DEP. DEP may choose to issue what's called an NLV, a notice of violation, which would then have to be resolved. So,
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole enforcement
By
process.
that time,
right, there's a whole
we'll be
enforcement
on
process at PADA
Let's have a round.
to address situations like that. Rather than timing, frankly, I think that Mr. Cook is talking about is providing it to the borough upon reasonable request whenever you request it.
If I can, I'd like to jump, Dan, back to the original site maps, and I remember early on that there was a lot of discussion about the, what we call the dump site. And I notice now that that's not in the area that's circled for the project. Is that something that we could put back in the project, and we wanna list that as a condition? The dump site that was initially, figured to be at least a buffer zone, because you weren't gonna put any buildings there, as I understand it.
Well, in the very original design, we did have the wet cooling, when we had the wet cooling tower, it went back.
Oh, you had some.
When it was redesigned, when the wet cooling was changed, we got away from both the dump site and one of the wetlands.
Now, so your question is, are we willing to take over that property? Yes, we could,
That's something we have to
we
discuss
could
with the
discuss
borough.
that for sure.
No,
We
you're not
won't,
taking
we don't
it
intend
over.
to build on it, so.
You're not taking shit over.
Hey,
All right.
Boy, that was terrible.
That's ridiculous.
We sat here all night and listened to you.
Would be the subject of
Yeah.
I apologize.
land sale
But
Yeah.
for
A sale.
fee. Without a doubt. Discussions have already been commenced between legal counsel and myself, which is an executive topic. Council isn't even privy to it yet, but it's the sale of the land is something that's being discussed.
It's worth a lot.
We talk about conditions, we always put a condition on, to the best of my knowledge, Gene, correct me if I'm wrong, that all permits need to be in place before construction commences.
Correct.
That,
All, and that would be at any level of government, that's correct.
The dump.
Another kind of standard condition I've seen sometimes, though it seems a little redundant, is a condition that we will comply with all of the representations in the application.
Thank you, I think that's automatic.
Yeah, yeah, but
Yeah.
suspenders and a belt, but I've seen it.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
to me, it's okay.
Right.
That gets back to my answer to Mr. Green, because that was what I was believing would be the case.
Question? Mr. Green, you were talking about the monitoring. Do I understand that the monitoring devices are isolated to the site and do not continuously stream, let's say, the data to a neurological center?
Excuse me, could you folks hear okay? It's getting a little bit loud back there, folks.
Well, you guys are chit-chatting too, so don't blame us.
We're just, we just try to keep the show together.
Again, do I understand that the monitoring systems are isolated to the site itself? Or are they continuously streaming the data to a national, like an environmental center?
not
or
yet.
Meteorological center?
EPA's intent is in the next, I would say within 10 years, the type of monitoring systems that will be in place, those data will be streamed almost in real time to an EPA database that the general public will have access to. Right now, no, they are, monitored and will be stored on site, and then a report, hard copy report or electronic report would be submitted to DEP.